Event recording is in progress. Look, all the buttons have been pushed. Okay, so let me go ahead and do my quick intro. Okay. Hi, I'm Idella with the Center for Technology Commercialization, or CTC, and I'm here with Pat Deno, who is COO of Brady Medical and President of Strategex Solutions, which is a strategic consulting firm. Pat brings over 30 years of experience in OEM marketing and manufacturing, and it's our goal today to share some of that wisdom with you, especially as we talk about manufacturing, best practices, and challenges in the healthcare space. So, hi, Pat. Thank you for joining us. And if you do us a favor, can you help us set the stage? Tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the experiences that you've had in tech commercialization.
Yes, good morning, Idella, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to, very happy that I'm here this morning and very excited about sharing some of the thoughts and experiences I've had. As Idella mentioned, I've had 30 years of experience in manufacturing and medical product launch. And I worked with a number of OEMs, very large scale, mid-size, and also startups. And there's so much value that the startups bring to the medical space with their ability to come up with new ideas and new concepts that some of the larger scale companies, they look to those early stage companies for new opportunities and growth. And in a startup situation, I've worked with quite a few that have been in fact, the last 10 years, I've worked with FDA Class 1 devices and Class 2 devices that have been custom syringes that for medications, for new infusion products, infusion sets, DNA testing swabs, insulin pumps, ocular devices, aesthetics, just a variety. It's been just a pleasure working with all these types of people and companies and bringing their products to market.
Well, that is definitely a wealth of information. And part of what we're hoping to do today is talk really high level about what healthcare companies may not appreciate about manufacturing and what are some of the considerations that they can do early in the process, even if maybe manufacturing isn't initially what they think they will be doing as part of their own exit strategy. So let's start at the very beginning. What do early stage healthcare companies not appreciate about manufacturing? In just a second, let me unmute you.
If you are new to the medical device market and development area, I think one of the biggest considerations is the amount of time that it's going to take to develop, and the fact that you will be dealing with the government. The FDA controls new medical products and how they come to market. And one of the things that they need to consider right from the very beginning is this product, how does this product fit in the FDA classification? Is it a product? Is it a class 1? Is it a class 2? Or is it a class 3? And there's specific guidelines on how this will affect your product and how it's divided and how it's categorized. There is a website that I'm going to add to the chat here that is an FDA government document that describes, what you go through in determining that. And basically, if you are a class 1 product, the time to market is quite a bit less. It's a low risk. A class 2 will be something that is a little bit more medium risk. And typically how I have classified or simplified it is, do bloods or pathogens or do fluids flow through this? So it could be an IV tube, it could be a syringe, it could be anything that fluids will pass through. And there's other criteria as well, which is explained further in the document. And then a class 3 is the highest risk, and that is typically something that's implantable. And those typically between a drug and the implantables, those take the longest to market. So one of the other considerations with this too is, and from an early stage person, you want to talk to an FDA consultant right away to understand the requirements that you're going to end up needing to comply with.
So you've talked, you introduced the idea of the timelines. And so part of what you're telling us is there are considerations from the safety and regulatory side of things that might impact kind of the manufacturing timelines. Can you give me a little bit more, maybe in the context of an example, about how those, what the timeline is between kind of those two relationships, and maybe some specifics about what a company or startup should be doing kind of as they're navigating those two spectrums with their business?
So from a timeline perspective, a lot of things that are guided along the process is typically you're going to be working with an engineer. You should have a development engineer, and you're going to be starting with prototypes. And with the prototypes that their engineering firm will be developing, you want to create a device history file, and that will be all part of your quality system that will be required as you're developing and going through the process. And your prototypes are going to be your first iteration. And those are, once you get those developed, you want to make sure that the materials you're picking for those prototypes will be manufacturable. So right away, you want to start talking with manufacturers. And once you have something to show them, you can talk about the concept, but they're going to want to see what this looks like. And they will tend to guide you into, okay, this would be good with this material. This is what this is for. And getting that relationship started right away is a really great thing, because they will guide you. A good manufacturer wants to be successful. He wants to have a partner in this. So they want to talk to you at an early stage.
Let's talk a little bit about some terms first. So you mentioned quality systems. There are a lot of different kinds of quality systems. Are there some definitions that a startup might consider when they're looking at quality systems of their manufacturer, and what needs to be the fit for the kind of product they're trying to develop?
So when you're in the design space, the design for manufacturability is kind of a key thing. And that is something that they call the DFM, so design for manufacturability. It also is something that your engineering firm and whoever is developing the product, this is a process that they review. They look at your prototype again and determine how this will be manufacturable. And from that stage too, and from the early stage, which we've talked about, you want to maintain these design history files, because those are going to be really important to your quality system. And your quality system will have to maintain these records from the very beginning through the design for manufacturability, through the whole process, the entire manufacturing process. And it really is your documentation of everything that you're going through.
I just want to dig into that just a little bit more, right? So is this as simple as I have a nice lab notebook, I have the things dated, and I have some information, or is there something a little bit more that a company can do to be responsible for what the downstream process is going to need to look like?
Absolutely. And in answering that question, you really, some companies may not know what they need to do in the beginning, but you really need to make sure that you keep track of any early iterations of your design. You want to take photos, keep any drawings, make sure everything's dated, and those then can start to be archived. But the initial process, this will be good for your IP as well. So you want to make sure that everything is documented. And if you're working with a patent attorney, they'll be very happy to see this. These are all things that you're going to need moving forward. So again, just to answer the question, you want to make sure you have your photos or drawings and eventually your CAD files, everything, keep that in a safe place and make sure it's all documented with dates, keep any notes, keep any improvements that have led you up to the point of manufacturability.
Before I leave this little topic, there was a question that came in that I thought is timely, and the question was, are there industry-specific programs or products for these design history files? Is this something a startup should purchase, or does that typically come from the engineering consultants that they hire?
Well, with the design history file, engineering firms should have some knowledge of, keeping track of this, and they will. And if you make it known to them up front that this is going to be a medical device that will require an FDA approval with the 510K, they understand, or they should understand, that they need to keep these records. And they will be, you will need to describe, what is the device, what's the purpose of the device. There are forms, there's templates that that can be developed, but it's really an ongoing process. Once you start with your quality system, any notes that you've taken previous to that can be added into your system, and they will help guide you into the proper format.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about kind of the preparation that it takes to work with a manufacturer. We've begun to touch on this already. And two big questions that I kind of have that I hope we'll talk on is how more can a startup prepare to work with a manufacturer? We've talked a lot about good quality documentation, but how early in the process should a startup consider finding a good fit manufacturer, and what are some of the characteristics of a good fit? So maybe the first question that I have in this is that what can a company do to begin to foster a new relationship with a manufacturer? At what stage should the company be? Is there something that a startup can leverage for this relationship? It's not like a lot of companies have a lot of extra cash on hand. They may be a little bit squeamish to kind of reach out to a manufacturer in this process. So what do these initial conversations look like, and how can a startup be prepared to negotiate a deal with a manufacturer?
Well, I think that initially, when you go out and when a company will go out with a prototype, if you've got a prototype developed, and start talking to the manufacturer, they are happy to start talking even at an early stage. There may be some that are very large manufacturers that only deal with super high volumes, millions of product. They probably would not be a good fit. So I think, looking and asking questions initially, when you reach out, will you work with startups, and will you work with a low volume and help us go through the design for manufacturing process? And also, is the company certified are they 1345 certified? That is a medical certification. Will tell you that they are familiar with all the documents and the processes that you have to go through with the FDA. So those are some considerations right up front, asking questions. But if the companies, don't be afraid to go and ask questions. You are going to need to know what this is going to cost. And from an upfront standpoint, there's going to be tooling involved, and there's going to be a production part price. So you need to understand what that's going to be, because if you are in a place where you need to go for funding, you need to have that in your projections. You need to understand, what are the terms that they can offer us? Is there something more favorable? Do they have terms for startups? Can we start at like 20% down and then another 20, and then, or do they require 50 down? You want to make sure that you understand that, because it's part of your financial strategy when you're planning this as well. But again, you want to understand too, what are the timelines that they're going to be looking at? So if you're starting with just looking at the design for manufacturability, that's going to be an engineering back and forth. And you want that involvement because ultimately it's going to save you time and money in the long run, because you don't want to come to them with a fully developed, ready to go thing, and they tell you, no, that this is not manufacturable. We need to start over, or we need to have like 2 months worth of work. that can set a whole process back and cost a lot of money. So it's better to get the early involvement just so that you have an understanding of the timelines, because they will give you timelines on how long this will take. Is it 9 weeks for tooling? Is it 14 weeks? Is it, how long is it going to take once we get the tooling? What do we have to go through from a validation? These are the things that they can walk you through so you can understand the process.
Could you tell us a little bit, can you give us an example of that process, maybe with a company that you've worked with? We've introduced the terminology of tooling. Maybe not everybody understands that and what's involved and who's involved and what the outcome is for that. So maybe can you, through an example, tell us a little bit about some of the timelines that one might experience and some of the parts that are involved?
Sure. I can just give you a reference. There's a few that come to mind. One is an infusion device. That's a class 2. And in that case, they have some pretty complicated parts. So, and pieces, I should say, components that make up the finished product. So in that case, their tooling was a bit of a challenge. We did go back and forth quite a bit with the manufacturer because there were complications. So we came up with it was early stage involvement. The design went great, but so once you go from the design to the tooling, the injection molder or the contract manufacturer will run the test, will run the part and see what the quality test parts come out and how they come out, if there's any issues with the parts. And in some cases, you will find out if the tooling needs rework or if it's okay as is. And typically you might find a few little bugs that need something. They may go back and polish a tool. They may have, some specific things that they may need to fix. And in this particular case, it was a challenge because it was complicated and the tool had several rework issues. So it ended up extending the timeline. And I believe if they wouldn't have gone into the early stage involvement with them, it could have taken them at least another year or two because of the problems with the complications. And another example is, in the case of Brady Medical, we have 2 different products that are being developed, and one of them is a class 1 and the other is a class 2. And the class 1 device is a lot shorter to market. And from a prototyping standpoint, we're able to work with a prototype tool that will get us parts faster. And faster to market. So there's lots of variables that that you can guide through the process that will get you to the finished product faster.
And just out of curiosity, right? So if I'm looking at a timeline here, if I'm a startup with a medical device that I'm going to need to manufacture, would you recommend that in parallel with the FDA conversation, they're having a conversation with a potential manufacturer? Does this come after they've gone through some process with the FDA? Where do the two kind of work together?
So you really want to, as I mentioned in the beginning, I think of our conversation, you really want to talk with an FDA consultant or an FDA person to understand what your requirements are. And the manufacturer, if they are an ISO 9001 and a 13485, they're going to understand what you need to comply with. And those two need to be understood, by the person developing the device up front. That your actual dealing with the FDA really doesn't come into play until you have your full quality system in place, all your tooling, all of your, you have your first products for testing, going to test, and everything passes. Then you file what is called a 510K with the FDA, and that's your first encounter with the FDA. If it's a class 2 or class 3, you really want to have all of these things. There's a lot of things that have to go into place, but you need to follow and develop your quality system as your whole process is going along, because that is ultimately what you're going to be filing with the FDA. There's several things you're going to need to do, but that that will put everything into place.
That sounds good. Okay, so there was a timely question here, and in this section, I just have two more questions, and that is, are there some common mistakes that a startup makes? And then are there some specific resources here in the state of Wisconsin that a company might consider when it comes to finding a manufacturing partner?
Well, as far as common mistakes, I think there's a few things I can maybe point out or share that you really want to ask for, so you don't end up making mistakes. And again, you want to check what the company's certifications are. How are they familiar, and what types of medical products have they developed in the past? What are their services that they provide? And are they providing a full turnkey? So can you go to them for this design for manufacturing? They'll do the manufacturing. Will they do the assembly and packaging for you, or packaging and assembly? And do they have, will they be able to help you with warehousing your product? Or do you need to look for an outside service? These are things that, you want to discuss with them up front, because you will need to have these things in place or discussions about these. And also, where are they making their tools? Are they making them in-house? Are they sent offshore? Are you then dealing with China? Are you dealing with Chinese products, merchandise? You want to make sure that you understand all this. Again, check their websites out. They should have a lot of these things on the website, and then you can educate yourself before you have a conversation with them.
That's fair. And just the follow-up of, are there some, I know Brady Medical has found a couple of great resources here in Wisconsin for manufacturing, and if there's anything that you might recommend on that, and then I have a question after that.
Sure. Yeah. So back to the question about the manufacturers. Our Midwest region has such a great resources for these types of services. There's very high quality manufacturers, tool makers. We're very fortunate to have a lot of these resources available to us in a very close radius. So there's a lot of good options available. And, what I might recommend for somebody considering this is talk to a few of them and see where you have a good fit. I think the relationship level and, how your comfort level with them is really important, because you'll be working with them for a long time.
That's fair. And I just have to, I feel like I should mention that, we have some companies that are kind of in that pharmaceutical realm and in other spaces where they may not, they may not know how, or they may not consider, or may not feel very relevant that manufacturing is important for them in this early stage, especially if they're thinking like, we're going to exit before manufacturing is even, something that we have to deal with. Somebody else is going to do that for commercialization. What kind of things have you seen, or what advice would you offer, or when should a company not think about manufacturing as part of their process?
If you are going into, if this is the strategy that you're looking to develop, you will still want to go through this development stage, understand the FDA process, and get your quality system, and go through the steps of getting to your design engineering, your manufacturing. You can start talking to OEMs and making sure that you have an NDA in place, a mutual NDA. That is very, very my number one thing I tell all early stage companies. Anytime you're working with anybody, make sure that you have your NDAs in place. When you're talking with a pharmaceutical, or you're talking about anybody working with OEMs that may want to acquire your product or your technology, you need some of these things in place so that they know that you're on the right path. When they're looking to acquire you, they will probably have a lot of these systems that and people in that can take this and develop it further. But if you have the good ground base, the ground foundation, it will provide value to you, from, it will make you look more attractive, and it'll be an easier transition for them. So I think whatever stage you're at, I think even from an early stage, it's not too early to start talking and getting relationships on board with some of these larger OEMs if that's your strategy.
So now I want to turn to kind of help in getting through this. We've talked a lot about what you should know how to do and some of the questions that you should ask and working with an FDA consultant. And it does seem like you need to have, or it would be of value to have a helper, a Sherpa, if you will, through this process. In your role in working with startups, what are one or two questions you advise that they may ask of you, of a consultant in this space, to find someone that's a good fit?
Yeah, I think I would start by asking, what types of medical devices have they worked on before? And, was it a class 1, a 2, or a 3? What is their comfort level? Some people don't work in class 3 because of the liabilities involved, and the time frames are very long. And you want to make sure that they're familiar with that. You also, should find out what types of services that they offer. They may offer this early involvement in the manufacturing. They may also be able to help you identify your packaging and who potential could be distribution partners, and onward into relationships with OEMs.
That sounds good. Well, we're coming up to our final 3 minutes here, and we've asked a fair amount of questions that are in the chat. If anybody else has any more questions, please put it forward, or put it in the chat, because you can't unmute yourself. Brian asks, what about upfront costs that might surprise a startup when working with a manufacturer?
Sure. That's why I encourage you to start talking with them as soon as you have some prototypes that are good iterations of the concept, because you will need to know what those are. There's going to be tooling fees. Some companies will offer their design help for the design for manufacturability, and that'll be built into their tooling cost. Other companies may offer or may propose some design engineering fees. So you may end up having some non-reoccurring engineering fees called NREs, or there may be things involved. So you want to understand that right up front, and they should be able to provide you a quote and walk you through those quotes. And again, what are their terms? Understand what their terms are up front.
Thank you. Any other questions that are in the chat? I'll give you about 10 seconds to type it in. And then while I'm waiting for any final questions to come in, Pat, what do you have any final words of wisdom to leave us with here in this last minute or so?
Yeah, I guess I would like to say, when you decide that you're going to develop medical devices, and I've worked with doctors, I've worked with clinicians, nurses, engineers, just across the board. And, the one thing that a lot of them, they all have in common is that when you are looking to develop a device, this is something that could potentially change a person's life. It could present some new clinical outcomes. And these are wonderful things. This is a long process, but we are so fortunate to have people that actually do bring these products to market and take the time to do this, because this is what drives, the technology and what we ultimately see, in our lives.
That's always a good reminder to know that there are reasons. there are reasons for all of your hard work, right? All of the entrepreneurs and the startups in this process, and it is for the patient outcome. And so it does seem onerous and troublesome and a lot of things to try and get into place, but it is for the long game of improving somebody's health and outcome.
Absolutely. And, I guess one final thing, when you look at the manufacturing stage and developing a device, the earlier you get somebody involved or to start talking to somebody, that the better, because you will end up saving money if you don't want to go down the wrong path. If you go too far down the path of development and it becomes, no, we need to redesign this, you don't want to have to go back and tell your potential investors or go out and raise additional funds because, you need to redesign, 50% or 70% of your product. So that will save you a lot of time and a lot of money.
Again, also a good point, so that we know how we're getting the product to the people that need it.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today and providing some of this very high level wisdom. Do you mind if we put out any contact information for people to reach out?
Yes, absolutely. I work with early stage companies and I'm happy to provide advice and guidance. I also mentor, people if they have a companies, if they have some issues going on, I'd be happy to talk with them.
Fantastic. Well, I will formally conclude this quick chat and say that the Center for Technology Commercialization is Wisconsin's free resource for SBIR support. We do manage a number of grants and programs on behalf of the state, helping small businesses and entrepreneurs consider, compete, and win SBIR funding. There are, of course, several upcoming deadlines for health tech innovation. So we also recommend that you reach out early to get help and prepare for these funding opportunities. And with that, I'll say thank you, Pat. Thank you for those who put questions in the chat. And this is formally over.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I will stop the recording.